Vladimir Putin's press secretary was asked repeatedly whether Putin is willing to use nuclear weapons against the United States, NATO allies, or even in Ukraine. And the way he refused to answer the question clearly at first was concerning, but stay tuned for the second video where things get even worse. Let's watch the first.
I need to ask you this because the world is afraid, and I want to know whether Putin intends the world to be afraid of the nuclear option. Would he use it?
President Putin intends to make the world listen to and understand our concerns. We've been trying to convey our concerns to the world, to Europe, to the United States, for a couple of decades, but no one would listen to us. And before it is too late, it was a decision to launch a special operation, military operation, to get rid of entire Russia that was created next to our borders.
What? To get rid of Russia?
Anti-Russia. Because Ukraine started to be, it was formed by the Western countries, anti-Russia.
Okay.
This is the problem.
Okay.
So there he is repeating, honestly, some pretty ridiculous concerns that Ukraine was, gonna do away with Russia, invade Russia. There was no indication that was gonna happen. We've talked about NATO and how Putin claimed that NATO expanding to its borders with Ukraine, joining NATO is a security risk or security threat in his eyes. But what was interesting there was his unwillingness to directly answer the question and how he immediately went to Putin wants the world to listen to what we have to say.
Yeah, so we're gonna get to the nukes in a second, and that's the most important part. But real quick on this, guys, look, I know that's gonna be on Tucker Carlson tomorrow night and on many of these fake left programs, etc. The same exact talking points will be repeated, parroted by them. I don't want a single one of you believing this nonsense of Ukraine invading Russia. I mean, who's really, please tell me that no one's that stupid. There is no biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the very few countries in the history of the world that actively gave up its nuclear weapons. There was no remote chance that Ukraine was going to go into Russia in any way, shape, or form. In fact, Russia took Crimea from Ukraine, and Ukraine still didn't even come close to threatening to go into Russia proper, let alone taking back Crimea. All of this is completely made up. It's 100% Russian propaganda. I understand what they're saying about the expansion of NATO, but let me add one more thing to that. So we've told you that, hey, NATO didn't need to go all the way up and surround Russia. NATO was supposed to protect America, Europe, and our allies, but by getting so close to Russia, it's being slightly counterproductive, okay? Now, that is a reasonable point of view. On the other hand, if you think that NATO was going to invade Russia, you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
100%.
No one thinks that. There's not one shred of evidence of that. And they shouldn't be overly aggressive, and they shouldn't intimidate, threaten anyone, okay? Having said that, there was a 0% chance NATO was, and guys, it's not because NATO is altruistic or America's altruistic. America picks on countries that it knows it can decimate, like Iraq and Yemen and Somalia and Vietnam, and we even lose those wars. We lost in Afghanistan and Vietnam, etc. America doesn't go pick on militarily people its own size like Russia and China. So no, we were NATO. Guys, what is, like, there's so many conspiracy theories out there. There's only one thing that explains everything: the money. It's that simple. And America is gonna make money, at least some oil companies and bankers, etc., are gonna make money, and defense contractors, by invading a smaller country like Iraq. But they're going to make less money if they start a nuclear war. Easy to understand. So all of this is total propaganda. It's important you know that before we show you the next clip.
Well, since he refused to answer the question about whether Putin is willing to use nuclear weapons, he was asked a second time, and this is where his answer was extremely concerning. So let's watch.
I want to ask you again, is President Putin, because again, the Finnish president said to me that when he asked Putin directly about this, because President Putin has laid that card on the table, President Putin said that if anybody tries to stop him, very bad things will happen. And I want to know whether you are convinced or confident that your boss will not use that option?
Well, we have a concept of domestic security. And well, it's public. You can read all the reasons for nuclear arms to be used. So if it is an existential threat for our country, then it can be used in accordance with our concept.
I think that was pretty clear. Nuclear weapons are definitely on the table for Russia. So what we saw from Putin, where he's alerting nuclear authorities to be on the ready, all of that stuff, it wasn't just posturing. And that is why calls for a no-fly zone in Ukraine is incredibly belligerent and irresponsible. I understand the empathy, I understand the very human need to want to protect innocent civilians who are being killed right now, who are being targeted, whose homes are being destroyed. I totally understand that. But you have to take a step back and think about it logically, think about it rationally. What are the consequences of engaging militarily and directly with Russia? And the consequences could be dire, especially when you're talking about a guy who definitely has nuclear weapons on the table.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different possibilities here. So normally the nukes are supposed to be, the other side is launched, we're all gonna die, let's murder all their civilians as well. Now that's already as horrific a scenario as you can imagine, and that is the best case scenario for nukes, for using nukes, justifying the use of nukes. That he's saying, well, it would have to be an existential threat. Okay, well, I just described the existential threat, right? So, but in his opinion, as he said earlier in the interview, he thinks Ukraine is going to invade Russia, and hence that might be an existential threat to Russia. Well, okay, is that true? Of course it's not true, it's absurd. But what matters is what's in their heads.
Right.
And so, and I don't mean genuinely, I mean just as an excuse, right? So you can tell what Putin's gonna do based on the excuses that he uses. So when he says the other side has biological and chemical weapons, he's about to drop biological and chemical weapons. We've seen it over and over again, right? So when he says, I am worried about an existential threat to me, hence I might have to use my nukes, So look, I just hope there are rational people in Russia that do not let him do it. Remember, at the end of Trump's term, our top military commanders basically took control of the nukes and called other countries and assured them that the lunatic in charge here would not be allowed to fire the nukes. We do not appear to have similar checks and balances in the Russian system.
Definitely not. I mean, yes, our democracy has been chipped away at over decades, but in Russia, I mean, you now have Vladimir Putin putting his own, spy agents on house arrest because the war isn't going the way that he wanted it to go. He feels that they gave him flawed intel. But remember, he's also the guy who surrounds himself with yes men. And if anyone dares to go against what he believes or dares to disagree with him or give him information he doesn't like, he immediately talks them down. There's consequences for them. So it's a lose-lose situation. There's no one standing up to Putin in Russia.
The only silver lining in that spy agents being arrested story is there's a second reason why he's putting people under house arrest, because he's worried they're gonna turn on him. So if he's worried about that, he's probably heard rumblings from oligarchs and other powerful people in Russia saying, how much are we gonna bleed here? Both literally and then symbolically in terms of money before we get rid of this guy. He's a danger to the whole world, and he's certainly a danger to the money of the oligarchs, which is usually the most important factor.
And by the way, if you're wondering, well, what is Biden doing? We've talked about the sanctions that he had already implemented. He has taken a trip to Europe where he is speaking to allies about implementing additional economic sanctions against Russia, in addition to holding countries that help Russia evade those sanctions accountable. And of course, they have their eyes set on China in that regard. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I think so far, his measured response to this has been responsible.
Yeah, and last thing, I know I have thick skin because I got to do the news every day, and every day there's something depressing in the news, and this is depressing as it gets. But I want everybody to just look. If you're not in politics, there's nothing you could do. Don't start sitting at home worried that a nuke's going to drop on your head any second. Live your life, okay? But make sure that we're all doing the right and responsible thing as a country. And so far, and this is exactly why you have to have competent people in office. Biden, I think, is a disaster in domestic policy, but he has handled this pretty much brilliantly. And that's why you don't elect clowns into office, because of dangerous situations like this. And he has walked the line just right, where he has not been provocative, not done the no-fly zone that could start a war, but at the same time, hurt him so bad with the sanctions that the oligarchs might take care of business in Russia on their own. Now, the jury's still out, but so far, it has been nearly excellent leadership. So let's stay the course here in that regard and hope for the best.